r/NuclearRevenge. When people ask, what's the worst thing you've ever done? My mind instantly loads the following story into memory, but I've never shared it. Until now. Obligatory background. I grew up in the Pacific Northwest to an entertainment industry family. I spent a lot of my formative years on the road touring. It was a deceptively conservative life. When I was around 8 or 9 years old, I witnessed a jazz sax player from a band that my dad had booked shoot up and drop dead. This really drove home just say no. High school straight shooter. I played music all through school and started working professionally at a young age. I was pretty much straight edge until college. I got around to reading some Hunter S. Thompson and decided that a bong hit wasn't going to kill me. A few years out of school, around 1991, I started a small indie dance label and recording studio. This was back before every kid with a laptop could record in their bedroom. Anyhow, my company HQ became a favorite hangout for local rave promoters and club kids. I became pretty well connected in that scene. I started experimenting with more and more types of party drugs and subsequently found myself with friends who were either major dealers or dealer adjacent. Untouchable. In this clique there were 3 or 4 dudes who would be considered douchebags. You know the type. Fake tan, steroids, bleached hair, nice cars, etc. There was one dude in particular whom I always got a bad vibe from. As a young man in my 20s I liked sex as much as the next guy if not more, but even when I was out clubbing looking to get laid, I never pushed my agenda, never used coercion, guilt, etc. to manipulate a woman into bed. If I spent $300 on dinner, I never felt like they owed me something. The only expectation I had was, if you make the date, show up. Which is just good manners. Anyhow, back to the doucher bag. Let's call him Tyler. This guy had a great sense of humor, the kind of good looks that make straight boys say damn, money, and a politically connected family. During the time I owned my label I also played in jazz clubs in our city. One of the venues was this really cool martini bar. One of the bartenders was this super cute, bubbly, bright, and just downright fun girl. I met her in the rave scene, but got to know her through my jazz gig. She was super flirty, but was super old-fashioned. I'm not saying she was waiting for marriage, but close. She had grown up in a really small town and never really encountered bad people in her daily life, so she was quite trusting. This all changed when she was date raped by Tyler. He played the long con with this lovely human being. She had very little experience with drugs and sex when she went out with him. He got her whacked out on MDMA, did some pretty messed up things to her, had a buddy take photos, and violate her too. She was never the same after that. PTSD, self-loathing, depression. It was as if he killed her. Turn the other cheek my ass. Tyler told her that she had blacked out and didn't remember being into it, and peppered her with the typical bullshit along the lines of, I don't have to rape anybody, I get all the girls I want. Along with, nobody will believe you, and even if they did, there's no way I'll get arrested. Etc. Personally, I was bullied a lot as a kid, and I can take a lot of shit and not blink an eye. But when somebody hurts somebody I care about, I tend to lean toward asymmetrical responses. Ironically, Tyler was not a consumer of drugs nor excessive alcohol. This factors into things later. I spoke to 2 people about my plan. One was a major drug trafficker, the other was a member of state law enforcement. The Cliff Notes version of the retribution was, I purchased about $3,500 worth of heroin in pre-packaged / ready for retail baggies. I also got about 10 sheets of really powerful blotter acid. Tyler was attending a birthday party at a restaurant where I knew the valet staff really well. Well, not that well, but I was always an over-the-top kind of tipper. They knew me, knew I knew Tyler, etc. I told them I wanted to pull a prank on him and put something in his car. I slipped the guy a C note and told him it was harmless and wouldn't come back on him. So he agreed. I put the contraband under his passenger seat, gave the keys back and took off. Springing the trap. Tyler was a creature of habit and always took the same route home. My friend the state trooper didn't know what I was up to. I simply told him this dude who hangs around my circle of friends was becoming a major drug dealer and it putting my friends in danger. I told him the where and when and left him to his own devices. Around 1:20 am Tyler gets pulled over and my friend does a DUI check. Tyler went ballistic because he was stone cold sober. The trooper asks if he can search the car. Tyler agrees because he knows his car is clean. He gets arrested for possession intent to distribute, and the legally concealed pistol in his car didn't help either. He fought the law. If he hadn't been such a unfettered asshole, he would have gotten away with no jail time, but he was disrespectful to the judge and got 18 months in prison, not jail, prison. He really was a moron. Instead of keeping his head down, shutting the hell up, and doing his time, he acted like a horse's ass and ended up getting killed. I didn't mean for the revenge to go that far, but I don't feel remorse for how things played out one bit. I hope his rapist ass rots in hell. TLTR summary: when a dear friend fell victim to a serial date rapist, I get him arrested for drug trafficking with unintended consequences more dire than I had planned. Warning: graphic content described. Read at your own discretion. This has recently come to my attention through a family gathering, but it happened over 20 years ago. I live in good old sunny Portugal, in the Algarve to be more precise, and in the summertime we do what we do best, which is spend entire days at the beach with our families. At the time I was 16 and my brother was 4, and we had a friendly neighbor family which was basically our second family, and they had 2 daughters aged 12 and 6. Mariah and Rita, not real names obviously. Now, we basically spend every single waking moment together, since we literally live a few meters from each other, and our parents were pretty much inseparable, and would spend their own time together, since my dad was a fisherman, still is, and the girl's dad was also fisherman. Our mothers would do what mothers do together and cook, gossip, and whatnot. I was only 1 year old when we moved to the neighborhood, and a few days later, the other family moved in, and since we were literally the very first people to move to that neighborhood, it was a brand spanking new community still with half the brand new houses for sale. My parents befriended them very quickly. 4 years later, their first daughter was born, and I suddenly had a very loud and very active play friend as she grew up. Despite our age difference, we actually got along just fine, and over the years we grew closer and closer, and with our siblings being born, we were as brother and sister as they come. Like I said before, summer days were spent in the beach, and this is where it all began. One day mid-afternoon, we were all at the beach playing as usual when came to us and asked us if we had seen Rita, since she was nowhere to be found. We said we hadn't seen her, and the last time we saw her she was playing with some children right next to our towel spot. Her dad was frantically looking for her, and my dad was looking worried too. The next hour was spent looking for Rita, while Mariah was already crying because her sister was missing. My hair was pounding because this had never happened before, and they were both like my own sisters. Finally, after almost 90 minutes searching, she had made her way towards us and said she was playing with a few kids behind some rocks in the distance. This particular beach we were at was amazing, and at high tide, it was a swim paradise, but at low tide, all the huge rocks and boulders formed by the tides were visible and were awesome for some hide and seek opportunities. No second thought was given, and we all went home. Later that night, Rita's dad came to our home in tears and extremely furious. Turns out, Rita had been sexually assaulted by someone at the beach and was threatened with death if she was ever to tell anyone. Rita's mom found out when she was giving her bath and discovered her bodysuit. She wore one of these because her skin is a bit sensitive to the sun, had a cut in the crotch area big enough to reveal her privates, and there was blood all over it. She was immediately rushed to the hospital where the suspicions were confirmed that she was indeed assaulted. Even her dad was made a suspect after talking to the police, but was released after his wife's testimony. He was furious. There was someone at that beach we go to for years that has been snatching and raping little girls. After he talked to the police, they said there was nothing they could do since there was no DNA or evidence. Apparently the sick fuck used a condom, and that the best they could do was send out a patrol to the beach, but the presence of uniformed officers would scare away the rapist. Days had passed, and the behavior of Rita changed immensely, and she started avoiding me and any other boys in the neighborhood. She would get extremely scared around adults, even to the point of peeing herself and crying uncontrollably. I didn't understand what was happening because during this whole ordeal, I was completely oblivious to what had happened to her. I only found out 20 years later. I knew something was wrong, since I had overheard both our moms crying over it, but I didn't know what it was. So both our dads started plotting revenge and to end that pervert's reign of terror. One night, as they were talking to each other about what they could do about it, Mariah had sneaked out of her room and overheard everything. She approached them and said, "Is this about the man that hurt Rita? I can help." They both stared at her and told her to go to bed and forget what she heard. Mariah insisted and said that she wanted the man that hurt her sister to just disappear. The next weekend, the three of them went to the beach without the knowledge of the rest of us and started exacting the revenge. Mariah acted as bait, and despite being 11 she was barely any taller than Rita, so she could pass as a 6 or 7-year-old, and as she played near the rocks, it was low tide. Both our dads watched her from afar like hawks. Sure enough, 15 minutes later there was someone beckoning at her from behind a rock, and as scared she was, she approached the person. Our dads saw this and ran towards her. What they saw sent shivers down their spines. In the short amount of time it took them to get there, Mariah was already gagged, and her bikini bottoms were down her ankles, and the pervert was ready too. He had a knife in his hand, which both our dads promptly took from him. They said he tried to make some excuses about how he found her like that, and he was going to help her, but those were literally his last words. Over the course of what they said felt like hours, but was less than 5 minutes, they proceeded to beat the shit out of him, gagged him, stabbed him in his junk, bashed his head against the rocks over and over again, until he was still. Then Rita's dad dealt the last blow and stabbed him in the throat, leaving him there as he gurgled his last breath. They left the beach and Mariah was shaking, having almost experienced an assault like her sister. She started sobbing and crying in the car, but her dad managed to calm her down and assured her that her sister had been avenged. She didn't understand what had happened, but she was calm. When they got home, she was made to promise never to tell a soul, and this was their secret until now. 2 days later, the news of the body of an unknown sex offender that had been on the run was discovered next to a beach in Spain, and there were no suspects since he was badly decomposed. Apparently the high tide came soon after and took him away, which was a blessing to our dads. Rita still has nightmares to this day, but has had the fortune of marrying a wonderful man that helps and supports her, and Mariah carried this secret up to this day when she shared the story along with our dads. We were shocked, and my mom was furious at my dad because he could have been arrested and our family torn apart. Rita's mom started crying and begged her husband to tell her he was lying and that she couldn't believe her husband was a murderer. Mariah intervened and says she was as much an accomplice as our dads. Rita was not present as she was in the hospital delivering her first baby, and we all agreed never to tell her anything.